Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
It just felt like doing a disservice. These clinics, they are not cheap. They serve a very affluent clientele, but it's not right for that information only to be, within those kind of elite circles. So I wanted to democratize that information to help more people.
Hey, friend, I'm Julie Lyles Carr. You're listening to the AllMomDoes podcast, part of the Purposely Podcast Network. I want to give you a little heads up if you've got little ones in the car today. We're going to be talking about all things fertility. So if you want to take a moment, put on some headphones, just a little bit of big girl conversation is going to be going on today. So I wanted to give you that opportunity. My guest today is someone who has spent a lot of time looking at this whole world of wanting to get pregnant, trying to get pregnant, all the things that come along, and some of the rising rates we're seeing of people being challenged by that. I'm excited for you to welcome to the podcast today, Rachel Swanson. Rachel, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's amazing to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, friends, you've got a whole lot of letters that go on the other side of your name. So explain for the listener where you live, what you do, and what all those letters mean that follow your name.
Yeah, that's it's funny because this is always the part of a podcast or a show that it's so uncomfortable for me. I'm not used to talking about myself in this way because my full-time job, Julie, is basically getting all the information out of other people. We'll go into that for hours on end. But so right now I'm living between Miami and Florida, kind of split my time here. This is relatively new. I've been in LA for the past 7-8-ish years, and so kind of enjoying a change of pace, so to speak. And in terms of the credentials behind my name, so yes, I think just in terms of a brief background. I am a registered dietitian by training, have a master's of science in clinical nutrition from NYU, did additional functional medicine training after getting my license, and so on and so forth. But essentially, all of this distilled into one sentence is basically I see myself very much as a conduit to helping other people achieve their health goals so that they can pursue their passions and purpose while on this planet. And the way I go about doing that is helping people leverage diet, lifestyle, and environment. And that's pretty much all you need to know. We can throw the credentials out.
I'm happy to see them and happy to celebrate all that you have accomplished academically and how you're using that to help your fellow humans. I think it's a beautiful thing. You have put together this idea of Fertility 2.0, and I want to back up for a little bit because obviously this is a podcast All Mom Does. We already sort of have this assumption that we are talking to women who already have children in their life, whether that is through adoption or foster care or by birth. And yet, Rachel, I am really fascinated, concerned, paying attention to the fact that fertility in this country, we have a lot of people grappling with, fighting, dealing with, making the decision that it's time to have a baby and then discovering that it's not going to be as easy as they thought. What are some of the statistics that we're seeing today when it comes to this newest generation of wannabe mamas and what they are facing?
Yeah, I mean, the trends are really undeniable at this point. I mean, look, there's one component of this that's undeniable, which is, we're choosing to have kids later in life, right? So there's a piece about the chronological age that, again, we just can't deny. And of course, this influences rates of conception. However, the modern picture, I feel like, tells so much more of a story than that because we have fertility rates dropping. As you mentioned, getting pregnant is harder than ever. Sperm count is also declining. Testosterone, right? All of these things. And so these trends, this picture that we're painting is not good. And it just doesn't account for, having kids at a later stage in life. And so, yes, that's very much sort of a modern picture of what's happening. And what I'm seeing sort of happen in clinic and just observe in clinic as well is it's like, one of the most powerful transitions in a woman's life, right? Her wanting to either build or expand her family. It's very much kind of getting stripped of this empowerment. Again, this is just an observation from practice. And so we can imagine that's why the case. I'm sure some of your listeners or many of your listeners have gone through this, but it's like all the problems that are rising, it very much challenges sense of self-worth and your identity because of this mismatch between expectations and reality, right? Like this inner turmoil where your body becomes the adversary. And so that's ultimately kind of why I wrote this book. And so, yes, we have the modern picture of what's happening in our country, but I'm also seeing these observations from practice. They deserve to understand how to leverage their body's natural intelligence to optimize reproductive outcomes. And I want this to be the time where women and couples feel the most confident about themselves and their bodies and their path forward.
Absolutely. We probably have some people listening too who, maybe the first baby, the second baby, that wasn't that difficult. And they just assumed that moving on to the next kiddo would be, rinse, repeat kind of a situation. And yet this phenomenon of secondary infertility seems to be a topic that is growing and growing in conversation. What are you seeing with that? Is that something with your clients that you're seeing come up quite a bit, that maybe the first time around wasn't a big deal, but then the second time things just aren't clicking?
Yeah, I'm seeing this all the time, and I am just looking at it purely from the standpoint of like, okay, say an individual, she got pregnant, had a pregnancy very, very easy earlier in life. She wants to have a pregnancy again, and there's a lot going on that is not going down the same path as before. And so I see this as, there are various, let's call them biological hurdles that we impose on ourselves through our diet and lifestyle choices and our environment, that it's not just making it harder to conceive, it's also setting up someone for potentially a more complicated pregnancy and potentially, really living a lesser quality health span and shorter lifespan. That's because we're looking at the root cause approach to why our body isn't functioning as we want it to, quite frankly.
Absolutely. And I know even for myself, I, did not have a difficult time getting pregnant, but I did have a mindset at times. Well, if we decide we're going to have another baby, then I will, cut back on the caffeine and I'll do a better job with the sugar. And maybe I won't eat as much, fill in the blank, whatever it is. It is interesting how we often have a mindset of, well, yeah, when we actually get to that point, then I'll start cleaning some things up, but not realizing that all of it can impact whether you're in a season of thinking you're going to have that next baby or not. For you, what became your fascination, particularly with fertility, that led you to write Trying, a science-backed plan to optimize your fertility? What was that process that piqued your interest?
I never kind of went into concierge medicine practice and private practice focusing purely on fertility and pregnancy, to be completely honest with you. So I see women across like their whole health span and lifespan, right? So it can be an individual who's 35, an individual who's 75. So I get to see this amazing kind of arc of what people care about at different times in their life. And so what started to emerge was this trend where people were having more and more kind of difficulties and struggles getting pregnant, where they would present into office because that was their goal. That's what they wanted to work on. And so again, just over the years, when you start seeing a trend emerge, and then you start seeing how you can help those women and those couples improve their outcomes at year after year, it kind of just gets to a point where I felt like I was doing a disservice not helping more women, given the outcomes that I was seeing in practice. So, being able to conceive easier, or if someone is going through IVF, you can still optimize your outcomes that way. It's being able to observe, women with less complicated pregnancies, even if they've had, 3 children beforehand. It's being able to witness, easier air quotes, okay, easier postpartum recoveries compared to before, if they kind of optimize their, again, their body's natural intelligence, right? Optimize their body prior to getting pregnant. And so again, it just felt like doing a disservice. These clinics, they are not cheap. They serve a very affluent clientele, but it's not right for that information only to be, within those kind of elite circles. So I wanted to democratize that information to help more people.
You think that you are in the final round of getting all this parenting done. You've got kids who are in high school, you're starting to think about college, and you're thinking, this is it. I'm Julie Lyles Carr. I'm a podcaster and I'm a mom of 8. And here's what I want you to know about George Fox University. It's a different way of doing college. Why? Because yes, it's all about getting a fantastic degree to set your kid up for their future. They have 60 undergrad programs available at George Fox University. But that's not where the story ends. It's also about equipping them spiritually. If you get out of college with a degree, but you don't have a closer relationship with God, that obviously is going to deeply impact what your young adult life looks like. So for your kiddos, I want you to consider, what would it mean for your child to be able to go to George Fox University, where 93% of George Fox students say they now have a closer relationship with Jesus? George Fox University is located in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon. They have 23 Division III athletic programs, and 100% of students at George Fox University receive financial aid. George Fox University is dedicated to their promise. They want every student to be known for who God created them to be. So listen, parents, yeah, you are getting into some of those final laps, but you definitely want to make these last laps count in a big way when it comes to the legacy of your parenting. So be sure and check out for your student, georgefox.edu. That's georgefox.edu.
Talk to me about, we have allopathic medicine in this country that is the prevailing approach, if you will, a theology of medicine that, all these systems in some ways, not that anybody says it this specifically, but these are like separate things. If you're having a kidney issue, that's for the kidney doctor. And if you're having a heart issue, that's for the heart doctor. And if you're having fertility issues, that is for the fertility specialist doctor who may prescribe this or try that or want you to do this when it comes to pharmacological intervention, things of that nature. And yet in my own world, not necessarily specific to fertility, but I have to tell you, Rachel, I very much see us as far more integrated than that, and that all these systems are working together. Tell me, within your experience, what is the gap between people really understanding the connection of diet, lifestyle, and environment versus sort of how I think we often handle fertility challenges, which is, well, you need this drug in order to do this, you need this procedure in order to do that. Are you finding that practitioners are beginning to maybe better combine more of a holistic situation with health when it comes to the things that we're doing? Or is there still sort of this weird divide between, well, we're only going to talk about this specific goal of getting pregnant, not worrying about all these other systems and the way that we're living life? What are you seeing?
There are certainly some, OBs and REIs, reproductive endocrinologists, that do a much better job. But I think those are kind of the diamond in the rough, so to speak, where they are able to see, someone's body for this like incredible, kind of from a holistic lens that is very integrated in thought and in systems, right? A systems biology approach is essentially looking at how mind, body, spirit, all of these things are connected. And that's just, I don't want to throw all these doctors under the bus, because it's like, that's the medical system that we're trained under, and myself too, right? So we see these different organ systems like, the gonads, right? The ovaries for women, the testes for men. We see this as just kind of a very isolated and siloed problem, so to speak, when we're looking at what goes wrong, versus kind of taking a step back and seeing how all of these systems in our body are very much integrated. Like, how is our metabolic health influencing egg quality, sperm quality, rates of conception, this sort of thing. And so kind of going back to what you mentioned earlier, this kind of fertility 2.0 framework, I want to move how we approach this as, instead of fragmented, very siloed, very symptom focused, it's very much leaning towards proactive, being preventative about it, being highly personalized about the approach. And so that's kind of how the framework and philosophies differ. But gosh, Julie, I'll tell you what, we have a long way to go in terms of helping kind of the medical community with this. But again, it's not their fault, because they don't go through functional medicine training. Some do, and heck, seek those out for sure.
Right. Exactly. What are you seeing in our modern lifestyles, in the way we live? I've read, and you're going to know way more about this than I do, but I have read that in populations in times past, where there was war, there was famine, there was, incredible stress, that birth rates would fall. And there is a body of knowledge that says, look, the human body is very smart. God created us in a very intentional and smart way. And when the environment feels threatening, oftentimes our bodies are like, oh, this is not a good time to reproduce. This is not a time to bring another little human on board. Obviously, in our modern world in America, thankfully, we typically do not experience on our soil things like we see other places. And we, oftentimes have better resources. We have the things in some measure, wherever we're at on the economic scale, that should be signaling often to our bodies that we're safe, we're good, there are resources, we're relatively safe on these shores. And yet, with these rising rates of infertility that we see, clearly there are factors in our modern life that make our bodies think we are not safe. We are at war. There is lack. How do you think our perspective on modern life, the ways we view our careers, the ways we fight through traffic, all these different things, does that have an impact on how our bodies understand the environment, and therefore if it's safe to be producing babies or not? Does that seem to have an impact on us?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you bring up, just in terms of war, famine. This has actually been very, very well studied, and different hypotheses have formed around this, because, women who were pregnant at this time and who gave birth, they still saw the offspring of those children. And again, very, very well documented, well studied, that we see the offspring of those women have different sort of health outcomes. Here's what's very, very fascinating, because even though that was, a time of famine and of course a lot of stressors in one's life, of course, famine is a stressor on the body, of course, we're actually seeing how, just in the mirror opposite way, Julie, how then overabundance and overconsumption of, say, food in this scenario, and having, say, excess body fat stores, can also be a signal of stress to the body, and again, in a mere opposite way. And therefore the health of the, I call them offspring just because I'm speaking more about the clinical studies that have been done on this, and all the epidemiological evidence. It shows that, again, they also have a less optimal health outcome. So again, completely different environments, but same outcome, and which is not an ideal outcome, right? Which is the health and the trajectory of the children might suffer, or might not be as optimal as we'd like it. So that's kind of to set the stage. But yes, in terms of the environment, all of what's around us, our brain is interpreting as various inputs to the system. And so, of course, the stressors in our life, which is so much more than kind of the, emotional stressors that you and I might be thinking of right now. It's the physical stressors of, say, having high inflammation in the body, and maybe the stressors in the body that are due to a large sort of endocrine disrupting chemical burden from all the plastics that we have in our life, right? And what's in our modern day environment. I'm focusing on these things in particular because why focus on the things that we have completely outside of our control? I'm all about, giving women the modifiable factors that they can leverage in order to, say, reduce inflammation in their body, so on and so forth. But yeah, it's a very interesting conversation and interesting time, isn't it?
It is. It is. I love this phrase, modifiable. Say it again, modifiable factors,
Well,
right?
yeah.
That we
Yep.
can have some control over, because Rachel, you speak right to the heart. You know, there'll be a period of time where I'm like, oh, okay, we can't have any more black plastic. Okay. Got it. Got it. Okay. And then, the next thing will come out. Well, the way that this glass was, rendered and blah, 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 that's emitting blah, blah, blah. Okay. We got to get rid of, it feels like sometimes you come all the way around the curve on something and you're like, oh, so we're back to black plastic containers. Is that what we're doing? Like I lost the thread. So talk to me about those things that you see as modifiable factors, things that I can do a better job controlling when it comes to environmental toxins. You say that you have 5 simple things that people can do in their environment to make sure that they are avoiding some of the toxins. And I love your perspective. Yeah, there's a whole world out there of things we're not going to be able to control. But what are the ones that you think have simple and high value for us when it comes to our endocrine systems, our immune systems, all the things that control the inflammation we have in our systems? Give me those 5 that are a little simpler.
Yeah, well, I'll give you sort of the top 3, but to take a step back, I know because I'm listening to all these podcasts, by the way, and reading these books that are just about the subject. And gosh, like you would be scared as
Yeah.
heck when you read those and listen to them. You're like can't unsee
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
room that I'm living in. My book absolutely does not take that approach. Again, it's one chapter in the book. Yes, there's hundreds of takeaways where I literally want people to just pick and choose a few that are most applicable to their lifestyle, and then they can again move forward and living their life with confidence. You certainly do not need to go full force in terms of monk style living here by
Right.
any means. But so in terms of what is going to be the most reproductive relevant for the endocrine disrupting chemicals, these are going to be your BPA, your phthalates, your PFAS, which are forever chemicals, and then basically certain pesticides and herbicides. So these are the big 4. There are many, many others in terms of parabens, this and that. But the reason why I focused on those 4 is because Julie, in the book, there's over 400 clinical studies on the topic of fertility and pregnancy, and I just want to make sure that I'm delivering information that is well studied. Again, I'm not saying 100 different things you avoid. Like, no, there are
Right.
top ones that we know are reproductive relevant, and that's the one that we're going to focus on. So really for reducing the collective exposure to everything that I just mentioned, there's actually there's 3 top ways to do that. One is going to be the water supply that you drink most frequently. So at home, that looks like filtering your water. For some people, maybe this is like, I mean, duh, like this is a given. But for others, again, they drink from tap, and so this is kind of a middle ground where we can say we know about how much, unfortunately, water is contaminated due to runoff. So we can very much control that. The gold standard in this is a reverse osmosis water filter. It is a little bit pricier, but again, I'm trying to say instead of purchasing 100 different things that are different, like let's just focus on the top ones that are going to reduce collective exposure and therefore have high quality outcomes. So that's one, is the water supply. The second one is actually the indoor air, which when I was writing this book, I actually found most surprising. So the way that looks of, what actions can we take is, the room, if you don't want to, switch all of your vents in your house to a HEPA filter, which by all means go for it if that sounds like something you want to do. But that's very time consuming as well as pricey. But you can get a little air purifier that has a HEPA filters in, say, your bedroom where you sleep. And this has more relevance depending on where you live, of course. But again, that is something very, very simple that can be done that's going to help with all the endocrine disrupting chemicals that, of course, you can't see, right? They're in dust particles, they're in things like that. The third kind of top 3 category that I would go over is the amount your food is processed. So I work with a lot of executives who order, say, like DoorDash and Uber Eats every single day. And I think about sort of how all of these chemicals, it starts kind of sloughing off on the grease like resistant materials that surround the food, the packaging of the food, this and that. So that can look as simple as having, a few days a week doing some meal prep, right? Whole foods. This, the food part, it seems very intuitive, but again, depending on the population that I'm speaking to, it's like, well, I get my lunch catered every day at the office, sort of thing, and it's all kind of processed. And so really looking at the ultra processed foods in your diet, how much you're ordering takeout. Remember, the ultra processed food, it's not just about how it's poor nutritional quality and density in those foods. It's actually how much they accumulate these chemicals along the supply chain, right? Because ultra processed means there's a lot of steps from like the farm to how you eat it.
Right.
So each of those steps, it's like a double-edged sword, right? You have the nutritional quality of the food, but then you have the packaging aspect. So these are kind of the top three things. And I'm happy to go over some quick and simple other top 5 things you can look for in their house. But I do not want people to become overwhelmed. There's so much fear mongering about all of the endocrine disrupting. If you're really tackling food, water, and air, you're doing a lot. And that's what matters most. All of the other little things, of course, matter. Like, please don't cook with nonstick Teflon pans, for goodness sake. And, you can do all these other things like, whenever you're out of a product that you rub on a large surface area of your body, say like lotion and things of that nature, whenever you're out of that, you can use that as an opportunity to replace it with like a cleaner and simpler alternative. So again, we can go over more of those, but hopefully that answers your question. I'll pause here because I could talk about this subject for an hour, Julie.
No, it's fantastic. All of those have been fantastic places that, you're right, are very simple. And I love too the measured way in which you say, finish the bottle of lotion. It's fine. And then let's maybe talk about, going to a natural oil or something like that. I think that is such a great way in looking at it, because so often, and when we look at this whole world of how to build habits that are sustainable, I make the mistake all the time. All right, we're going to burn it all down and start over. And guess how often that actually really sticks? Not often. But when you can simply make some swaps into what you already do, simple things, I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at it. And I know you've got amazing information and studies available. Again, the book is called Trying, a Science-Backed Plan to Optimize Your Fertility. I want you to connect the dots for me, because I am so thankful and honored. I have audience who have been with me for a long time. And, when we started this podcast journey together, they had kids who were young and they were all in this era of their lives. Now they're heading into perimenopause along with me. And I have to think that as we look at the challenges people are facing in fertility, that we're also looking at some precursors for how the perimenopause season might just go. So for someone who's saying, well, I'm done with the baby years, talk to me about why these precepts, why these concepts around diet and lifestyle and environment are really important as we continue through life, particularly when we start looking at a season of life like perimenopause. Because I know everybody's story is different, but I was not prepared for how challenging that season is as someone who didn't necessarily struggle with fertility, but got to that window and went, what is happening? So talk to me about that connection.
Yeah, so many things on this subject, just because again, it's like I have an equal amount of women in perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause. So I often don't get to talk about sort of this topic, and so I appreciate you bringing this up, because what I did was something very intentional with this book, which is I made sure that all the information that you read in each chapter, yes, the actual science is applied. The clinical studies are applied to fertility. But to your point, these are root cause sort of issues and concerns that are so relevant no matter the life stage that you're at. And I cannot repeat that enough. So I'll give you one example, because we just spoke about the chemical component in our environment. everything I just said, in terms of like, what are we trying to avoid, PFAS, phthalates, like all the things, and how we reduce them. So we talked about in the context of how that can help, increase chances of fertility. However, there's also been studies which are fascinating that show women who have the highest exposure to all of them, so collective exposure, right, enter menopause on average 4 years earlier and
Wow.
have worse vasomotor symptoms. So basically the symptoms that you experience, it could be the, sleeplessness, night sweats, just all of these things. So, I mean, that is incredible from a research perspective to have that data. And so again, yes, you might not be trying for a child, but this is information that is vital for every woman to have. And those changes that I discussed are still going to be very, very much relevant for you. Again, there's hundreds. You can pick and choose what is applicable to you in your lifestyle in the book, but it's so important because now that we know that data, we're like, wow, that actually does matter. So how does that even happen, or how does that even association exist? Quite frankly, think of it as almost like, I think of it as like an accelerant of reproductive aging, right? That includes ovarian aging. And so clearly the environment is having, effects on, our delicate sort of hormonal symphony. So it is quite relevant. So thank you for bringing that up. A few of the other points of the book that's also going to be relevant for perimenopause and menopause in general is, of course, topics like metabolic health, which is discussed in the book. And that also plays a role in, say, body composition. That plays a role in symptoms. That plays a role in how you feel on a day-to-day basis. Microbiome health. For example, I discuss things like the vaginal microbiome, which historically is never discussed in the context of fertility. All the latest data is on that in the book. But in terms of like perimenopause, menopause, we know that vaginal microbiome shifts, and therefore some women can become is essentially more predisposed to having infections that they wouldn't normally have, or they start all of a sudden experiencing symptoms that they wouldn't normally have because of the shift of microbiota that's happening, and therefore that changes the pH, so on and so forth. We don't need to get into that per se, but again, all these little details matter, and I can make the argument of every single little factoid in the book of how this applies to perimenopause. I wrote this book, of course, with the intention, it was the publisher's intention to make this about fertility. But Julie, I'm actually the one who wanted to say, actually, this should cover the entire reproductive arc of a woman because these things matter at different time points. And so I'm so grateful for you even bringing that up and letting me connect the dots between those two. Because again, we are not in a siloed way. This is all spectrum.
Absolutely. I love reproductive arc. I think that's a beautiful way of looking at that because, that even plays into, and I think helps women make decisions about how they want to pursue things if they are having fertility challenges and what that impact of those choices might be on the other side, because it's not just about getting to the place where you can get pregnant with the baby. It's also the impact on your health long-term and thinking about those things. And we don't always do a good job of thinking about our health and the bodies God has given us in that way, that we do have an arc to this whole thing. I love that you put it that way. Well, Rachel, tell the listener where they can find you, find all your great information, find the book, all the things, because I know they're going to have a million questions and want to know more. So where can the listener find you?
Oh, come at me with a million questions. I welcome every single one of them. My website is rachelswanson.com. You can find information about the book there. I'm getting a lot more social with this book launch, Julie, on social media. So yeah. I'm at Rachel's RX on Instagram. You can find me there, and my practice information, that's all on the website. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate we touching on all of these subjects that are so important no matter what your age.
Absolutely. And I wish we had time to go on because I have so many more questions, but you just have done such a beautiful job thinking through all of this and helping guide us in a way that is very whole, that really helps us think at a higher level on what we're doing, what we're taking in, how we're living our lives, and the impact that it has on our bodies. So thank you so much, Rachel, for the work that you do.
Thank you.
All right, friends, you know what to do. Show notes. Rebecca puts those together, and you're going to find all kinds of great information about Rachel Swanson and her work, the book, all the places you can interact with her. So be sure and check that out. Hey, do me a solid. Grab the link from this episode and send it to someone who you know is having questions, having challenges about fertility, about perimenopause, about all the things, and wanting to find some simple ways that they can live a healthier life. When you share links from certain episodes, that's one of the best thank yous you can give us. I love it too when you come over and chat with me, usually on the socials. I'm on Instagram, Julie Lyles Carr over there. You can also find AllMomDoes at all the places, blog, social, all the things. And I will see you next time on the AllMomDoes podcast.